My name is Glenn Kaiser. I'm the director of the Dolby Institute, and welcome to our session today on Stranger Things. So I want to thank this amazing team from Stranger Things Season 3 that have come to join us here today.
Thank you, Glenn. Hello
Thank
again.
you.
Thank you, Governor.
Yeah, Craig and I have done so many of these things together by this point.
I don't want to talk to you anymore.
We can finish
Talk
each
to
other's
Mark.
sentences.
Yeah.
Craig Henighan, the sound supervisor and re-recording mixer on the show. I'm just going to go down the line. Mark Patterson, the dialogue and music mixer. David Klotz, music editor. Angelo Palazzo down there, the sound effects editor, and also Katie Halliday, sound effects editor. Thanks for joining us. So, show of hands, how many people have seen Stranger Things 3? Wow, okay. Well, for the rest of you, spoiler alert, I'm sorry, I can't help you. You're going to learn some things about the show. It's pretty amazing. In preparation for the conversation that I knew we were going to have today, I actually went and binged all 3 seasons in the past week, so I'm a little up to
Stranger Things out. Probably. Yeah. What theories do you have? Fan theories do you have about what's going to happen?
I have no idea where things are going to go in for, but I'm curious to find out. But there have been Craig, you and David, I understand, have been through the show for all 3 seasons. Yeah. And one of the things that is really apparent if you watch them all back to back is sonically and musically how much bigger the show has gotten since the beginning. But can you talk a little bit about working with the Duffer Brothers and how you got involved with the show and sort of how it's evolved over the 3 seasons?
Yeah, sure. I mean, like a lot of projects, I got a call from Rand Geiger, the producer, and Rand works with Sean Levy, a director that I would tend to work with a lot, and he's like, hey, we know you work on a lot of film, but we have this series that we're doing with Netflix. It's called Stranger Things. We think that you should come meet the Duffer Brothers. And so I did, and I read the script and kind of came away from that. And I just made a few sounds on spec, and some of them were for the Demogorgon, some other things like that. I didn't have any visuals. I just sort of imagined a few ideas, sent them down while they were shooting, and little MP3s. And that sort of started the relationship of what I could provide for them sonically. And out of that, we just sort of grew as a team, in terms of the sound design and work. And then David came on when the show was sort of more in gear. Survive had already sort of started. Michael and Kyle, our composers, had already started doing some music, and the Duffer Brothers had used some of their music in some of their early, ideas of what they wanted the show to sort of sound like sonically. So it happened pretty organically or naturally.
Great. David, anything to add to that?
No, that all sounds good.
Accurate?
Yeah, it's all
4 years ago?
Yeah, I recall that exactly the same way.
Thanks, Dave.
Consensus is good. Okay, so just to give you all a sense of kind of size and scope, let's take a look at the first clip that we have up is the first. It's within the first few minutes of episode 1, the big twist this time is that the Russians are involved. In a sort of big military industrial sort of way. So this clip is going to give you a little bit of a sense of just the bigger size and scope of season 3 of Stranger Things, and we'll watch the clip over our shoulders and then we'll talk about it.
You've made it when you get laser beams in your show, right?
It's not a show if you don't have laser beams.
Right. Exactly.
So I think, Craig, obviously you spent a lot of time in the feature film world.
Yes.
We've done panels before on Roma. I know you're just finishing up Terminator. Mm-hmm. So I know that the Duffer Brothers, when they came to you, part of that thinking is we want the scale of this to feel like a feature. But how do you accomplish that within kind of the realities of delivering on a TV schedule and budget? Because it really sounds huge, like a big movie.
Compression and limiting and choices and selectivity. The great thing about the Duffers is they've never been afraid to make really bold choices. Although the mix and definitely Mark and David can talk further about sort of mixing and the challenges of that, but they've always given me at least a lot of sonic space, and a lot of the trick with every show, any project you kind of do is to get sounds in early and get them in the Avid early and get them sort of used to the sounds. So my goal is always to sort of give them the best sounds as possible early. So this scene, for instance, they sent me this probably 4 months before our even official sound schedule sort of started. And that was similar to season 1 and season 2. They would always send me clips of like, hey, can you work on this, the Demogorgon or what have you. So, you know, and then obviously the scenes sort of dictate the size and scope of sort of what you want to do. And in this season, because, you know, Will Files and I wanted to sort of amp it up a little bit, because obviously visually they'd amped it up, and the tension and with the Russians and the sort of just size and scope of the monsters in season 3, we knew that we needed to sort of make the sort of sonic real estate a little bit more muscular, and that, and also musically they were going to come to the stage with a lot of music and stuff. So frequencies, you don't have to get too technical about it, but it's you know, looking for frequencies and looking for sort of different low end things that work, not only in big speakers and that, but also in sort of like your small and your home speakers. And we would do a lot of testing back and forth early on about what would work and what didn't work. And then the other side of that is just making stuff that sounds fucking cool, you know, and then they like that, you know, and then sort of living in that world of you know, what the monsters are going to sound like, knowing not to paint yourself in a corner too much. So you sort of, I tend to make a lot of sounds early on, and I try to take 2 or 3 weeks on every project, at least minimum at the beginning, even if I don't have picture, just to make ideas. And then I sort of use that to pull from for either sounds or inspiration, or just source ideas of like how to get something to be as big as it needs to be, but still fit in the world of the project that I'm working on.
Well, I would say to you all, you can get as technical as you want to, because I think this is a pretty geeky crowd, and certainly our podcast audience loves nitty gritty detail whenever it comes up. So please feel free to you know, go as far off into the weeds as you feel you want to on that stuff. But I'm kind of curious. So it's 8 episodes, which is roughly 8 hours of content. I think episode 7 is a little over
episode 8
is a little over an hour.
Yeah,
that's the long one. But how did it? We were talking with the Carnival Row crew earlier this morning, and it was all out of order. They started with episode 5, and episode 1 was actually the last one that they did, principally because of visual effects.
Right.
But I'm kind of curious, like, what was the workflow for you guys? Did you think of it as an 8-hour piece? I presume you were working in episodes, but what was a typical schedule as you were going through?
Anyone else want to take that? No?
I think we thought of it as kind of 8 big reels, is the way we looked at it. Will and I, coming again predominantly from feature, that's, you know, we just approached it the same. It was just 8 massive reels.
It's just a big movie, right?
Yeah, essentially, yeah. And because of the Netflix format, you know, one of them isn't broadcast. You can go back at any point. So there were a few ideas we came up with like later in the season that we thought, that might be cool to go back to 1 and 2 and implement those ideas, you know, so it's nice.
We were talking about that this morning, because, like, you know, obviously as you're going through, you may do something and you think, oh, I would really love to go back and reopen up one of those earlier episodes and kind of either tease that this is coming or be informed by that approach. So you were able to do that.
Yeah, and, you know, the amount of treatment on dialogue was just so much more than your average show. And I think I sort of evolved as we went along, and I you know, I might do something later and I think that's cooler, you know, so I'll go back and make a change, and it's nice to have that flexibility. That's the same as, you know, we would do if we were mixing an 8-reel movie, the same thing.
You just mentioned treatment on the dialogue. Can you talk a little bit more about that? What were some of the dialogue challenges on this? I'll start by asking you, like, how were the production tracks, and how did you? What were some of the dialogue treatment that you were talking about?
Well, production tracks were great. And also Ryan, the dialogue editor, just makes my life so easy. So fortunately, you know, having to do such a quick premix and get in shape, I didn't have to do a whole ton of cleaning just because the quality was there. So I could focus more creatively, you know, and Craig touched on it earlier. The Duffers, I don't think I've met 2 guys that encourage creativity like they do. You know, they just want you to try anything. And if I thought I did something over the top, I never did. They wanted more, you know. And that's what the show is. I feel like I would joke with Will and say, it's like this show was written for sound, you know. Like, I just can't do enough stuff that's cool that will survive, you know. And I do that all the time on every premix. I'll try ideas, just try little things here and there, and they don't always survive, but on this one they did. So there was a ton of, delays and just popping lines, basically. Even, obviously, if you guys have seen it, we have the upside down and all the different treatments that we try to keep consistent through the show. But even just in normal dialogue scenes, if there's a plot line or just something significant, if I just ping some delay, the guys were cool with that, and it started to become the style of the dialogue through the whole season.
Just in terms of, you say ping some delay, just in terms of like setting something off so that it's actually, calls a little bit more attention to itself?
Yeah, because I've always tried to do that, just to have that 3D effect, so just to trying to pop certain lines, just depending on where the camera is. And I always see it as like just to add something additional, some kind of reverb or effect just to help it. And if you're in that stylistic mode, you start to really explore that. And it doesn't stick out because there's so much other design work going on around it. It starts.
It actually enhances the design work, and
yeah.
it becomes part of it instead of it being sort of two separate layers, which is really fun for our sound designers because it's going to not just stop at the sound effects. It's going to go into and also with the music, it's like a whole. For a show that's so adventurous sonically, it really does all gel together, and that's it might not always be said, but that's sort of the unwritten sort of goal, is to make sure obviously everything is sort of working.
Yeah, and just to touch on something you were saying earlier, we were fortunate on this show. We would have access to be able to view the episodes basically on different formats, because for me and Will anyway, it was the first kind of time we were in that environment. As we're used to being in a room like this where the way we make it sound is the way the audience are going to hear it, and it was a new experience not to have that. And we worked out pretty quick that we can't rely on low end like we can here. It sounds cool in certain environments, and if you're going to listen to it on a 5.1 or whatever at home. And I think part of the way we made it sound big and bold is to not rely on the usual things that we would in a room like this, to make sure there's frequencies in the screen channels as well as the sub, and keeping that dialogue level flat so that the lower sounds can punch through, and all those tricks that help it translate to sound big into the real world.
Well, you say you weren't dependent on low end. However, I don't know.
Yeah, there's still a lot of it.
I don't know if we have this clip, but I got to ask you, like, because I found it really amusing, the footsteps on the Russian Terminator kind of guy. I forget exactly what his name is, but every time he seemed like he weighed several thousand pounds. He had a big presence, which of course, when he punches people, that you feel that in your gut as well. So you did use quite a bit of low end from time to time in the show.
Oh, we did for sure, yeah. And that's but everyone involved, and the Duffers particularly, they're not going to miss a trick just because there's some footsteps. Let's do something with them. Let's use every opportunity to make a statement, and that was one of the coolest things about it.
David, this is a pretty, music-driven show, and obviously part of the whole concept behind Stranger Things is that it's set in the '80s, and it's kind of it's an homage, I think, to the kinds of movies that the Duffer Brothers, were watching when they were younger and growing up. One of the things that just struck me as I was watching season 3 was, my God, what was the music budget on this show? There's so many great songs in it. Can you talk about kind of the decision-making process around the songs, and also how you balance that with score and kind of how the music came together?
Yeah, sure. So our music supervisor, Nora Felder, was responsible for finding the songs early on. I know before even I started as music editor, she was sending a lot of ideas to the Duffers, and they have specific ideas in mind already. I think a lot of the choices were what they had come up with from the beginning. I think it was 1985 this season, so we were all specific about finding songs that were released that year. Kyle and Michael's score, again, this is like the third time around working with them, and I think they're brilliant. Their score has gotten better, bigger and better, and they spent a lot more time. I think they finally got, season 1, they would send a stereo mix, and we'd be stuck with just like finding ways. I would frantically call them from the stage, be like, look, can you just take that bell sound out? Just send it without that, and it'll work. And that now they're printing stems, and it got wider and wider, and I think the challenge this year was the Duffers were looking at the score out of context from our mix, and they would love these cues, and then when we get there, like the clip we just watched, I remember, I think, Mark, you took out tons of stems that, like, some things didn't even play. We had to just, like, only have one stem going or something.
Yeah, you can imagine the first morning when we put the reel up and when we played the premix and I heard that machine.
There's a lot going on
and
there.
how awesome it sounded. And then the cold sweats kick in as I realize I've got to get some music through that, But again, the Duffers, they'll look at that and they'll say, no, the machine's important here, so that they're not afraid to take things out, whether that's design or music, and they'll make those decisions on the fly, which is a big part of why we get to where we get to.
Yeah.
Let's take a look at the second clip. I think this is from episode 2. This is Billy in the phone booth. You wanna set this up at all?
I think I just wanted to sort of we did a lot of what we refer to sort of as like glitch editing and stuff like that, and it sort of will demonstrate some of Mark's the dialogue treatments he was talking about earlier, and just sort of how it meshes well with a lot of the distorted sort of glitchy stuff that we were doing sort of in the sound design, yeah.
Great. Let's run the second clip, please.
It didn't have any dialogue in it. I'm sorry, Mark.
Let's talk about sound effects.
Yes.
Worked really hard on those breaths.
That's my fault. Sorry, I should have made it a little bit longer. You did a really good job on it.
Angelo and Katie, I'm curious to hear from you guys about the pace of this show is pretty fast. There's a lot happening, and a lot of stuff happening on the screen. And how did you guys approach the material, and what were the challenges for you guys from a sound effect standpoint?
I mean, it was a big focus was keeping it really big and heavy, chunky, like kind of. Craig set the tone with the sound design being very cinematic, and I've worked with Craig many times, so I kind of knew going into it what was expected. So it was always keeping everything really heavy and bold and thick, like everything from cars to any of the doors and all the fireworks stuff and things like that, and just keeping it really aggressive and interesting like that.
And gore. That was the biggest thing that Angel's not talking about. We did a lot of, if the Duffers would always season 1 was the monster was this way, and in season 2 the monsters are this way, or the scares or whatever if they had a mission statement for each series or each season, season 3's mission statement was sort of to get as gory as you could possibly do. And if you've seen some of the episodes, you see how the rats that turn into the baby monster that then turned into the bigger monster. There's a lot of gore that Angela and I had to sort of deal with, and we recorded mud and other things like that. A lot of sloppy sort of stuff to make it feel that way.
It was very wet.
It was very wet. It was very gory.
There was a lot of bones popping out.
Yeah.
There's also
there was a lot of fighting back and
Katie,
forth.
I just realized you don't have a microphone. It's like
you just oh.
It's like, hello. I think actually I was going to say, based on the gore thing, that was a huge thing that I was in on, was making these little extra textures when we would get visual effects updates, especially with the Mind Flayer. And I think one of my favorite things with working with the Duffer Brothers is we both, some of our favorite movies are creature features. And
yeah, John Carpenter's The Thing gets referenced several times in this movie, and there was some homage action going on, right?
Oh, totally. Yeah, there's lots of that. And I think one of my favorite things about them is they could never be grossed out enough. So, they would be like, can we get something even more gross here? I'm like, okay, there you go. And I'm like, they're going to want to tone that down. And they're like, no, that's great.
So when you have this kind of challenge about okay, well, I have rats that explode and then their bodies reform into this sort of upside down creature. From how do you start to even build what that sounds like?
Did I take that? Oh, I use my voice a lot. Actually, I do a whole pass, and I use Dehumanizer a lot and other harmonizer plugins and stuff. And I literally try to perform gurgles, and I have like half a glass full of water, and I sort of gargle and kind of do like stuff, and that gives me a roadmap, seriously. And some of that stuff I'll go on loop record, and I'll just do long performances of that stuff and then start cherry picking out certain things. And that stuff tends to get you pretty far for the smaller creatures. And then I got into a thing this year by recording, again using Dehumanizer, but not just for my voice, but I actually would start getting props and little things around the house. So like my ironing board has this great squeak, right? So it sounds great on its own, but if I ran it through Dehumanizer, but not in a post process, but actually performed it while it was live, through Dehumanizer, then being recorded, I could actually get interesting little things like that. And I use a lot of that for not necessarily the bigger creatures, but for when the two little tentacles come out of the rat monster in, I think, episode 3 or 306 or 307. So you start building sort of stuff from there, and then of course you get into like the bigger, either bears or wild beasts or elephants, or I use seals a lot in season 1. So that I sort of leave those for the Demogorgon, right? So you start looking for
that's part of the sound you establish for that specific creature,
yeah,
right?
Exactly. So there's sort of like I try to sort of have little rules about maybe I'm going to make this creature with no animal or human sounds at all, and then I'll tend to do a week or so on that and try to just use whatever tricks we use as sound designers to figure that out. And sometimes that works really well, and other times it's a massive failure. But I think in the failures is kind of where sound design actually can become really interesting, because you start finding these little nuggets that might not work for that, but they'll work 2 episodes or 3 episodes later. But I feel like if the performance is there, or I try really hard to get the performance for the characters, because I think the duffers always look at movies that you and Katie were just referencing, or Gremlins is another one that sort of like popped up this year a little bit.
It's a big touchstone,
and
yeah.
It definitely popped up last year with the Demodogs and all that. So, I have a little formula that way, and I don't know what season 4 is going to be, but I'm kind of running out of ideas for monsters. So I'm hoping that
one thing that was kind of
neat
with the monster was one thing I'm a big fan of is scraping stuff. So there was one big scream with the creature in the hospital scene where we kind of tag teamed it a little bit, and I just kind of brought in these like really aggressive scrapes of anything I could scrape, and just try to make it as vocal as I could.
Yeah.
And those seemed to work out good with like the bone and the texture of the creature. Just scraping stuff seemed to kind of work with that.
Well, I'm curious too, just about the mechanics of trying to, attack something of this size and scope. So, Angelo and Katie, like, how did you guys? What was the division of labor? Who was responsible for what?
Basically, the workflow was I got the episodes and cut the full shows, and then handed it over to Katie, the stage, for any kind of ads and stage support, fixes, updates, and then I would jump to the next episode and just start hammering it out, cutting, and I had about 2 weeks for each episode, which was for me was awesome. Normally I don't on any kind of like streaming, broadcast, TV, I don't usually get that much time, but they were such big episodes. We kind of came at them like little movies, and Craig and I had just come off Alita Battle Angel, so we were kind of in that like big sounding mode already. So we, I would just kind of hit it really hard and then hand it over to Katie to take it from there.
So now I'm understanding. So Katie, you're in the hot seat. You're on the mixing stage. So when these guys play something back for the duffers and it doesn't really quite work, then everybody turns and looks at you, right?
Well,
well, luckily that never really happened.
Right.
You
got to say, Will
happen.
Files was our effects mixer. So he and Mark and Katie. Basically, the team on the stage was Mark and Dave and Katie and Will, and they are the ones that if the duffers weren't, they were the front line for that. And Angelo and I were sort of like either on to the next episode or trying to help out on whatever.
They coined a phrase, "We need a Katie special," which usually meant get us something more disgusting.
More disgusting. All right. Any little trade secrets? So like, how did you? What was the Katie special?
Just really disturbing. Usually, I mean, I started out like in sound doing like the Saw movies and like really disgusting gore. So that's sort of my specialty, I guess, unfortunately or fortunately. So, if something was like not, wet enough or not like disgusting enough, I don't know how else, they would just be like, Katie, like, I know exactly what you need. Just go and come back. And they were always like, are you okay? But yeah, I mean, that was a part of it. And Will's very detail oriented, as you can tell. And if there was like one he'd be like, there's this like one little thing like right here. Can we get like, all these little details that would pop up, especially as they just kept getting more and more visual effects and more complex, and a lot of destruction stuff came in later that I also added in, like exploding lights and things like that. So it was a lot of fun stuff, though.
I presume it's the same story that we're hearing all the time, which is like, there's no such thing as locked picture.
Exactly.
Visual effects are coming in late. You're starting to mix without final picture, and sometimes you get some surprises when visual effects shots.
And definitely cutting wise, for sure. Definitely sound design wise for a lot of the creatures. It's just like you kind of go off of a few frames or a little clip, and then the rest of it's instinct, and hopefully you don't back yourself into a corner.
Let's take a look at another clip. This is from episode 8. Neverending Story.
Oh, so yes, it's a David Klotz Spetzel here. Speak up, David.
Oh yeah, so Neverending Story. Earlier on in the season, I got a call from editorial saying we got a project for you. A couple actors sang the song Neverending Story live on camera, and we want you to try and put the original song to play it against them, to play underneath them singing. And they sent me the turnover, and it was such a mess that I threw my arms up in the air. I'm like, there's no way this is ever going to work. But I like a challenge, though.
So what did they turn over to you? What had they shot on set? What were they using? How did it come to you?
So they on set they had they filmed the actors singing the song a cappella with no click track or no guide track. So so you can imagine how crazy that sounds, right?
So they're not even wearing like earwigs or anything like that.
No.
They're just
and I don't know how the
song.
gestation of the scene came about, or if it was like spontaneous or scripted or anything. But I just know that they'd shoot one of the actors singing the song, and then when they go to a different take, the actor would continue singing, but they were at a different tempo. And then so I got this scene built together where every time they cut to a different shot, they were singing at a different tempo, and sometimes at a different pitch slightly. I called Dean Zimmerman, the editor, and said, "This is a problem. I don't know how we're going to do this." But I took a week, and I built a sort of guide track of taking the actors singing, and I said, if there's any way we could if you could line up the picture shots to land to match this guide track, then we might have a chance here. And so I did that. I sent him my guide track with a click track too. And you can actually tell the song does speed up and slow down a little as you go, because there's just no way to keep it one tempo. But Dean amazingly was able to build the shots around my guide track. And
so wait a second, you're saying that the picture team changed the picture to match the sound?
I know, that never happens. That never happens. Exactly. I felt so powerful. But then it got more complicated, because then I took the original Neverending Story song, the Giorgio Moroder produced track from the movie of the 80s, and it was so much faster than the original that I sped up the original track, and it kind of sounded ridiculous. It sounded like a club track. And so we left it as like, oh, well, we'll do a re-record of it. And then, the plan was that Kyle and Michael were going to eventually get around to doing it, and then they were just so busy and underwater with just trying to score the show. I was like, well, I've got a few vintage keyboards. I even have some of the same things that Giorgio Moroder used. So I was like, I built a little backing track and sent it to the Duffers, and they were happy, and that's what ended up in the show.
Composed by David.
I know, yeah. I arranged a Neverending Story for him. And I thought I did an amazing a mix of it, but then Mark kind of saved the day and actually fixed a lot of the vocals on the stage, and had a lot of bass, and a brilliant SSL bus compressor, which I will never not ever use again.
You're welcome.
Let's take a listen. Roll a clip, please. For the people who haven't watched season 3, they're like, why is Hopper in a Russian uniform?
Right. When I first saw that scene, I was like, did we jump the shark with this sequence? But we didn't. We pulled it off.
No, because I saw it early on, too. I had the same reaction. I'm like, what? How did we get from episode 2 to this? I had no idea. It was kind of crazy.
Right?
Yeah, says it, to quote another very famous movie, such a fine line between clever and stupid, isn't it?
It is. There is.
Yeah, it's really great work. It's really fun. We do have one more clip, or actually, well, we potentially have two more.
Oh, two, but yeah, we don't have to play
if we get to the last one. This next clip is from episode 7, and I had this as Rat Monster, Shadow Monster in the Hospital.
Oh yeah, so this will be like what we were talking about with the gore that Angelo, myself, and Katie.
Okay, so this is Katie's shining moment with lots of
yes, a lot of gore
disgusting
from
sound.
Yes, a lot of the Katie special of gore.
Yeah, and so this is a lot like we were saying previously. There's less time spent in season 3 in the upside down world,
right.
but a lot more creature stuff going on.
A lot more creature stuff in this one for sure, and even I didn't even read the scripts into 7 and 8 to understand that what I would figure would have been the bigger monster. It wasn't the bigger monster at all. The bigger monster shows up in
later. Yes, there's always a bigger monster.
There's always a bigger monster,
yeah.
but. So this was sort of built out of the rats and all that gore and sort of like the vocal ideas that we were talking about and all that kind of stuff. And then this is a showdown. The monster's in the hospital and is after all of them, but after Nancy for sure. So it's a little clip of him reforming, I think.
Yeah, this was a pretty intense thing to work on. I mean, it was like just from tons of fights, like big doors, the creature, the tons of gore. It was just like this, and then the lights were constantly. That kind of stylized lighting thing that Stranger Things kind of Craig established early on, and this was really a fun one to do. It was a lot.
We should probably give a shout out to your Foley team as well, because one of the things I noticed about season 3 definitely is people just get the shit kicked out of them. Like this is, they get beaten up a lot in this show, which I presume a lot of that fell on your Foley team, right?
Yeah, Steve Bain was our Foley artist this year, and Steve and Pete, and the guys at Foley 1 for sure do a great job.
Great, let's roll the clip.
Before the showdown.
It's a whole new experience hearing that 3 feet from a sub speaker.
Right.
So I'm sorry, say that again. What?
It's a whole new experience hearing that 3 feet from a sub speaker.
I was about to say no sub, right? But you're right. Yeah, we are sitting right on top of it, so it's a little intense sitting up here.
But only 5.1.
Yeah.
I know you work for Dolby.
Well, maybe season 4.
Maybe we've slowly convinced them to do an Atmos version, so we'll get there.
Yeah. Of course, they would probably respond, well, Atmos didn't exist in the 80s, so,
Right. We should be doing a mono or like early stereo, maybe. That'd be great.
Well,
Hey, Mark, that wouldn't be a challenge at all, right?
No, I think I'm busy that time.
Yeah. Did that ever come up sort of like originally on the concept for the show? I mean, obviously sort of visually the show is echoing 80s films.
Right.
Was there any kind of conversation about like what was happening in sound in movies in the 80s? Or
No, not really. I mean, if I think back at season 1 and 2, they've never been, Matt and Ross have never been guys to say, The Thing or, pick any movie, it's kind of obvious, right? And so, but they've never been like listen to this and directly lift it or listen to that for inspiration and stuff like that. It's just been sort of known to sort of go into that wheelhouse, and I think for me, the first few cues of music that I got, back in season 1, the early sound design that I was doing, I was like, oh, this is going to work really, really well. I thought initially that the score was going to be maybe more orchestral and stuff, which would have been challenging to sort of on a different level to get our sounds through. But there's a lot of scenes in every season, but season 1 and 2 in particular, where you'd think is music, but it's actually sound design, and vice versa. There's stuff that they've done that's very sound designy, that it's just an interesting back and forth.
Was that kind of a happy accident, or were there actually conversations that happened between you guys and the music team?
I think a bit of both. And I think the great thing about them, we do these fantastic spotting sessions where we're all there together usually, right? And that's doesn't usually happen.
You guys and the composers are actually spotting at the same time?
All of us would go, and composers are there, and we would, and music supervisor as well. And in our picture editors, and we would basically hash out,
who's going to do what?
Yeah, a little bit. And, you still get to the stage, and Mark, like you mentioned earlier, you still get those sort of, sonic train wrecks of like, oh, we got to do this, and we got to do that. And so there's always that sort of on the stage mixing of like what's important for the story, and that's obviously where we always come back to. Even all the cool, fun stuff that we make, it's still story driven, hopefully.
It's interesting because the music is written almost for emotion. The music is like the essence of the show in a way. It's not necessarily scored directly to picture like a traditional score. So you're able to even swap it out at times. If it's the wrong feeling, the Duffers have no problem. We remember this thing they've showed us and we'll swap it out. And we can almost decide how much music we want it to be because of the separation they give us. Is it cooler to take the melodies out and just have a weird sound designy moment? Does it work better with what these guys have done? Or should we pull all that more ethereal music out and go with melodies and make it more traditional score? We can make those decisions seeing how it sits with everything else.
So does that work? Because am I hearing you say that the score is sort of more kind of atmospherically driven as opposed to like hard hits on specific picture?
Yeah, I think
cuts?
it captures a feeling, whether it's nostalgia with the 80s theme or just some emotion depending on the scene, so it gives you a flexibility within the scene to move around. We're not stuck within a sync reference, or sometimes we are.
Well,
but not all the time.
I was going to say also a lot of the score, the Duffers are getting a library from Kyle and Michael early on, and they're just listening to all this stuff, and they'll grab something and put it in a scene, and that becomes the cue of the scene. It's nothing that was originally written for it, and eventually maybe they'll come around and reshape it to because they're like, we like this, but it just needs a little turn here or there, and then they'll do another version of it. But we do a lot of that on the stage too.
Yeah,
with the
we
Duffers.
can almost give them an example, like this is what we played around with, this is kind of what we're going for, and then they can make their changes to it, and use it as a guide almost.
Yeah. I'm hearing a lot of experimentation on the mix stage with the Duffer Brothers. So how many, what was a typical schedule on the episodes, or did how many days per episode, kind of how did that go?
For mix, we essentially would play back the first version on the 5th day, but Will and I would split up for 2 days.
So you'd mix simultaneously on 2 separate stages?
Pre-mixing,
yeah.
Okay. And then
So
I would do 2 days or so of pre-mixing before it went to Will, so that he could think more creatively versus just getting the sound effects and all the Foley and everything that
basic balance.
we had cut. So the basic balance, I wouldn't be applying reverbs and sub, but that's.
So you were feeding him 5.1 sort of pre-mixes?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So we all work in the same template, and basically it's a template I had for the first 2 seasons, and we just, when these guys came on board, we inherited that as the idea, and then Mark and Will would do their 2 days of mix, or day and a half, or whatever it took per episode. Some episodes took more, others took less, and then you'd mix together for 3.
Yeah. We tried to do 1 day pre-mix, and I think Will took one look at my face at the end of the first day as I tried to pre-mix an hour of dialogue in 1 day, and we made our changes, and that was working out well for us in the end. It gave us a good balance between both of us getting in shape and clearing out and being prepared, but also having enough time to play around, because we didn't want to be in a situation of, fortunately, having Craig do his past first put us in this situation where we were able to experiment, and play around with different treatments and different ideas, and rather than just scrambling to put the thing together.
The goal is the cinematics. It's the goal is the film idea, right? Like to just have more time getting your ducks in a row, for lack of a better way to put it, so that
totally.
When it does get to the stage, that these guys can go for it, and think about reverbs and delays and other things, versus a lot of TV schedules, as a lot of people know here, don't allow that time, and
it's kind of a great workflow actually, because I would work directly with Craig. Really, my sessions were going straight to him, so that he had his few days to kind of lasso it all together and do his thing to it. And then it got to the stage, and it was like everything was just humming by that point. And then Katie could step in and do anything that came, any updates and all that. And so it was really a streamlined process. It's kind of a nice example for others.
Yes.
if that's even possible.
So you would work for about 5 days, and then the Duffer Brothers would show up, and then kind of what would happen after that?
Yeah, so we'd play back on the 5th day for Rand, which would kind of be like a playback for us as well. Then we'd spend an afternoon doing notes, and then we'd play for the Duffers on the morning of the 6th day, basically. And then how long we would spend mixing after that would be determined by what they want to do with it.
And then studio playback and Netflix execs would come in and whatever. And then I think you guys would also put mixes up on picks that would go to Sean and other people that want to listen to certain things.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So was a typical, was like 7-8 days? Kind of how did it
I think
snug in usually?
I mean, the original sort of, budget or whatever it was like, can we do 2 episodes in 13 or 14 days kind of, and in season 1, it was like, could we do 2 episodes in 10 days kind of stuff. And so as the show's grown, obviously every part of the project has sort of grown, and thankfully sound has been respected enough that we've been able to sort of grow with it. And
I'm surprised they didn't come back to you and say, well, we're spending more money in production, so you're cut.
Right. Yeah. We're down 2 days. That's all you get.
We're going to take some questions from the audience, but before we do, I wanted to just ask you, like, a lot of the show this season happens either in the Russian bunker or in the shopping mall, which I presume were built sets.
The mall's a real mall.
Was it like a decommissioned mall or something? Like the production design did an amazing job recreating everything that I remember from the 80s in these shopping malls.
I think it was. I think
was
I
it
remember.
decommissioned?
Yeah.
Or was it decommissioned?
Partially abandoned.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, it was a partially abandoned mall, but it was actually still a working mall. Like half of it was working, and then the other half was like abandoned, I guess. So they took that part and just completely set dressed it.
With so much time of the show taking place in these kind of locations, did that present any kind of sonic acoustic challenges in terms of like keeping it interesting, or taking out the
air conditioning was the first panic phone call from the first episode of like Scoops Ahoy, where they're in the ice cream shop, and I don't know what they had. And it's Atlanta, so I don't know if it was summer. It must have been summertime, so it was extra hot or something.
Summertime in Georgia, nice.
Yeah, so there was a lot of hum and a lot of things that they were like in a panic of like, can this work? And
let's take some questions. Any questions?
Yeah. So I mean, the obvious big design moments are amazing. The mechanicals, the creatures, just so much cool stuff. But I mean, everything else in the show too, from doors, can down, just all the little motions just had such great detail and clarity. And I'm wondering, just sort of, what would go through your brain when you would find, like, when you're looking at your library, and what elements really like stood out to you, because it feels like everything was such a just wonderful, confident sound choice. And I'm wondering how.
Wow.
You guys
Well, thank you. That's very kind of you. I think, being season 3, kind of getting to see where the Duffers are at, and how much they like to sting everything, even if it's for in any other episode, it would just be a door opening and stuff, and we got to put this huge boomer on it or stinger on it and stuff. I think there's a part of that, and also just I think our approach from editing was to sort of make things sort of as big as we could. I don't want to say there's a comical is not the right word, but action movie-esque sort of vibe to this. You mentioned the Russian footsteps and stuff, and so this show kind of it's a believable thing, and you can get away with it. As in other projects, you wouldn't be able to really maybe push it as much. So that just left us the ability to sort of like try different things, and we wouldn't use a regular door open. It would be it might be something else with an explosion underneath it or some other helpers, it was just that's been an evolution over the last few episodes or seasons, sorry, and sort of just knowing what they like and knowing that Will won't be afraid to play it if we cut it, is another point, and him and I really came up with a plan early on for this season, was like, this is going to be, we want to really amp it up and we want to take it another level, and so once we figured out our formulas for, to fit it in to the broadcast sort of spec, we were really able to sort of like find certain frequencies and certain sounds that would fit.
But as you say, the show has a sense of humor about itself.
Yes.
And that opens up a whole world of sound design possibilities
Right.
that might not be open to you otherwise.
Right. And again, yes, and they, as I think Mark mentioned earlier, they are into it. There's never a too far, or and I don't mean that in a bad way or in a way. It's just they are really interested in exploring a lot of different things as you want in your directors, and that's what those guys are like. Yeah.
Not to be greedy, but 2, if you can get to them. Just first is if you could just tell the size of the stage you were working in and the channel count, speaker wise. Was it more of a TV oriented small near field stage, or was it a theatrical stage?
It was a smaller stage, and that was a conscious decision.
Yeah.
We coming from this environment and mixing
content that people are going to see like this made sense to me. But to work in a room, even though the show would sound awesome, to work in a room like this, and then 90% of people are going to see it on a smaller environment. We wanted to make sure that it was going to translate. So it was a kind of conscious decision and a talk that we all had before we started mixing, that we'd go into a smaller room.
Did you have any special tools to
we'd
check?
mix in 5.1 as well.
Did you have any special tools to check your down mixes and see, or just to go down to smaller formats like maybe sound bars or anything like that?
We did some pretty extensive limiting tester. So we had a quite refined process that we do for the 2 tracks, for example, to make sure that they carried through. And we were lucky enough on this show to be able to essentially check the episodes on Netflix on a kind of secure account before we'd even finished mixing them. So we were able to listen, everywhere from our iPhones up through to like a soundbar and whatever. And actually, we all kind of came back after the first episode and had similar conclusions, and we made adjustments going forward for the next 7 episodes, which kind of just stuck.
And was that basically because of specific things that the Netflix platform was doing, and as it streamed, in terms of changing some of the acoustic characteristics, and then you basically tacked for that?
Yeah, and I don't know if it's necessarily just Netflix. It's just
streaming in general.
Yeah, or just to produce a mix that can stand up in any format, basically, right down to a phone, because as we know, lots of people that's how they're going to watch it. So we wanted to make sure that, one of the things when we talked about earlier was we were losing some of the low end, or obviously it seems obvious because you don't have that range of frequencies, but that then means that if we focus on never relying on it, we'll never, for example, lose like the bass drum in the music or something. If I put a bump in frequency somewhere where that an iPhone can register it, then we know it's going to translate into that environment. So there's a whole bunch of things we did like that throughout the frequency range and throughout the balancing process that meant that we knew it was going to be represented.
Well, that's all the time that we have. I want to thank these guys for coming and talking to us about Stranger Things Season 3.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to our conversation about the sound and music of Stranger Things 3. Please join us again next week when we talk with the team behind the Amazon original TV series Carnival Row. Until then, this is Glenn Kaiser from the Dolby Institute.